The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as Maria Santos adjusted her Kevlar vest one final time. At 28, she had already broken barriers as one of the few female combat medics to serve alongside Special Operations Forces, but today would test every skill she had learned over 8 years of military service. The Navy SEALs conducting advanced combat training exercises had specifically requested her unit's participation, though none of them knew what lay ahead. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison watched from the observation tower as the mixed team of SEALs and support personnel prepared for what was supposed to be a routine urban warfare simulation. His weathered face showed the strain of leading some of the most elite warriors in the world, men who had seen action in the most dangerous corners of the globe. Today's exercise was designed to test their response to unexpected civilian presence in hostile territory, something that had become increasingly common in modern warfare. Maria had volunteered for this assignment despite warnings from her commanding officer that the SEALs were known for their intense, no-mercy training style. She had worked with special forces before, but never in such an immersive scenario. The abandoned warehouse district they would be using had been configured to simulate a Middle Eastern urban environment, complete with hidden insurgent positions and civilian role-players scattered throughout the area. As the briefing concluded, Maria noticed the subtle glances from the SEAL team members. Some showed respect for her medical credentials and combat experience, while others displayed the skepticism she had encountered throughout her career. Staff Sergeant Rick Torres, a veteran of 3 deployments, made no effort to hide his doubts about having non-SEAL personnel in what he considered a purely special operations exercise. The scenario was straightforward on paper. Intelligence had identified a high-value target in a residential compound. The SEAL team would conduct a precision raid while Maria's medical team provided overwatch and emergency response from designated safe zones. Real ammunition had been replaced with advanced simulation rounds, but everything else about the exercise would mirror actual combat conditions. What none of them knew was that the exercise controllers had introduced an unscripted variable. A group of role-playing civilians, including women and children, had been instructed to move through the target area at random intervals, creating the kind of unpredictable human terrain that made real combat operations so challenging. The controllers wanted to see how both the SEALs and support personnel would adapt when their carefully planned mission encountered the chaos of civilian presence. As the teams moved into position, Maria felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before any high-stakes operation. Her medical kit was positioned for quick access, and she had memorized the locations of all rally points and extraction zones. The communication system crackled with final position reports as the SEALs disappeared into the maze of buildings that would serve as their hunting ground. Morrison studied the tactical display showing the positions of all team members. The SEALs were moving with their characteristic precision, each man knowing exactly where his teammates were and what his role would be when they reached the target building. Maria's team had taken overwatch positions that would allow them to provide medical support while maintaining clear sightlines to monitor the exercise. The first phase went exactly according to plan. The SEAL team methodically cleared the outer perimeter, neutralizing simulated enemy positions with the efficiency that had made them legendary. Their movements were so coordinated that they seemed to operate as a single organism, each member anticipating the other's actions without need for verbal communication. Maria watched through binoculars as the team approached the primary target building. The morning had grown warmer, and she could see heat shimmer rising from the concrete surfaces around the compound. Everything seemed routine until the radio crackled with an unexpected transmission from one of the exercise controllers. A group of civilian role-players had deviated from their planned route and were now moving directly toward the kill zone, where the SEALs were preparing to breach the main objective. The situation that was about to unfold would test not just military training and tactical expertise, but the ability to make split-second decisions when human lives hung in the balance. As Maria adjusted her position to get a better view of the approaching civilians, she had no idea that within minutes, she would find herself at the center of a scenario that would challenge everything the elite warriors around her believed about combat, courage, and the true meaning of heroism under fire. The radio transmission sent a chill through the command post. Control to all units. We have unscripted civilian movement in Sector 7. multiple adults and children approaching target building from the east. Lieutenant Commander Morrison immediately switched to the command frequency, his voice tense but controlled. All units hold position. Do not advance until civilian situation is resolved. Maria heard the transmission through her headset and instinctively moved to a better vantage point. Through her scope, she could see a group of role players that included what appeared to be a woman with two small children, moving along a path that would take them directly through the area where the SEALs were positioned. The exercise had been designed to test decision-making under pressure, but this level of civilian interference hadn't been anticipated. Staff Sergeant Torres was positioned at the corner of the target building when he received the hold order. His team had been seconds away from breaching the entrance, and now they were frozen in place, while potential threats could be repositioning inside. The training ammunition they carried was designed to be non-lethal, but in the heat of a realistic exercise, the difference between simulation and reality could become dangerously blurred. The civilian role players seemed oblivious to the military presence around them. The woman was carrying a small child while holding the hand of what appeared to be a 6-year-old boy. They were following a path that would take them within 20 meters of the SEAL positions, close enough that any sudden movement or miscommunication could create a dangerous situation. Morrison watched the tactical display with growing concern. The exercise had been designed to last another 30 minutes, but with civilians in the kill zone, every second increased the risk of a training accident. Real special operations frequently dealt with civilian presence, but those situations involved extensive planning and rules of engagement that didn't apply to this training scenario. Maria made a decision that would change everything. Rather than maintaining her overwatch position as protocol demanded, she began moving toward the civilian group. Her medical training had included civilian casualty procedures, and she recognized that her presence might help diffuse what was becoming an increasingly volatile situation. She keyed her radio to inform the command post of her intentions. Overwatch to control, I'm moving to intercept civilians and guide them clear of the exercise area. The response came immediately from Morrison. Negative, Overwatch, maintain your position. We're working on extraction procedures. But Maria was already moving, her medical kit bouncing against her back as she navigated the rubble-strewn ground between her position and the approaching civilians. The SEAL team members could hear the radio traffic and see Maria's movement through their peripheral vision. Torres felt his frustration mounting as the carefully planned exercise continued to unravel. His team had trained for months for this type of mission, and now they were stuck in a holding pattern while a medic who wasn't even part of their unit made unauthorized moves in their operational area. As Maria approached the civilian group, she realized the complexity of the situation was greater than anyone had anticipated. The role players had been instructed to remain in character regardless of what happened during the exercise, which meant they were acting like genuine civilians who had stumbled into a dangerous area. The woman with the children appeared confused and frightened, exactly as a real civilian would be in such circumstances. The 6-year-old boy broke away from the woman and ran directly toward the building where the SEALs were positioned. In any real combat situation, such movement could be interpreted as a threat, potentially triggering an engagement that would have catastrophic consequences. Maria realized she had seconds to prevent what could become a training disaster. She sprinted toward the running child, her medical training taking over as she calculated angles and distances. The SEALs remained frozen in their positions, their weapons trained on various sectors, but their rules of engagement unclear when it came to role-playing children in a training environment. Torres could see both Maria and the child approaching his position, and he faced a split-second decision about how to respond. The command post erupted in activity as Morrison realized the exercise was spiraling beyond anyone's control. Multiple radio transmissions overlapped as different units tried to coordinate their response to the unexpected situation. The carefully planned training scenario had become a real-time test of judgment and restraint under pressure. Maria reached the child just as he approached the corner where Torres was positioned. In one fluid motion, she swept the boy into her arms and continued moving toward the woman and remaining child, creating distance between the civilians and the SEAL positions. Her action was instinctive, driven by her medical training and protective instincts rather than any tactical consideration. What happened next would demonstrate that sometimes the most important battles are won not through superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but through the courage to step into danger when others hesitate. As Maria carried the child back toward his supposed mother, she had no idea that her actions were being recorded by multiple cameras and would soon become the subject of intense discussion throughout the special operations community. The situation deteriorated rapidly as Maria moved with the child toward the other civilians. Unknown to anyone in the field, the exercise controllers had introduced another variable that would turn the training scenario into something far more serious than anyone had anticipated. Hidden speakers throughout the compound began broadcasting simulated gunfire and explosions, designed to test how the teams would respond to unexpected combat while protecting civilian lives. Torres heard the simulated battle sounds and felt his training take over. Despite knowing this was an exercise, the realistic audio created an immediate sense of urgency that made every decision feel life or death. Through his scope, he could see Maria moving with the child, while the other role players seemed to panic at the sounds of combat. The woman was screaming and reaching for her children, behavior that perfectly mimicked what would happen in a real combat zone. Lieutenant Commander Morrison realized the exercise had crossed a line from challenging training into something potentially dangerous. The combination of realistic audio, panicked role players, and Maria's unauthorized movement had created a situation where trained warriors might make decisions based on stress rather than judgment. He began issuing orders to shut down the exercise, but communication was becoming difficult as multiple units reported in simultaneously. Maria reached the woman and tried to calm her while maintaining control of the child. The role player was committed to her character, sobbing and speaking in what sounded like Arabic, adding another layer of realism that made the simulation feel almost too authentic. Maria's limited language training allowed her to understand that the woman was asking about her children's safety, a universal concern that transcended cultural and linguistic barriers. The SEAL team found themselves in an impossible position. Their training dictated that they maintain security and complete their mission. But the presence of civilians in the kill zone meant that any movement could potentially endanger innocent lives. Torres made the decision to break radio silence and communicate directly with Maria, hoping to coordinate their movements and get the civilians clear of the area. Overwatch, this is Alpha Team Leader. Can you move the civilians to the north wall? We need that area clear for extraction. Maria heard the transmission, but was dealing with a new problem. The child she was carrying had begun crying loudly, and the sound was echoing off the concrete walls in a way that would mask other audio cues that both she and the SEALs relied on for situational awareness. As Maria began moving toward the north wall, one of the exercise controllers made a decision that would transform the training scenario into legend. Without warning the field teams, he activated a series of smoke grenades positioned throughout the compound. Within seconds, thick gray smoke began obscuring visibility across the entire area, turning what was already a complex situation into something approaching chaos. The smoke changed everything. Maria could no longer see the SEAL positions clearly, and the SEALs lost visual contact with both her and the civilians. Radio communications became critical, but the overlapping transmissions from various units made it difficult to coordinate movements effectively. Torres found himself relying on sound and instinct as he tried to maintain awareness of civilian locations while keeping his team positioned for their mission. Through the smoke, Maria could hear the woman calling for her children in obvious distress. The role player's commitment to her character meant she was genuinely experiencing the fear and confusion that would be natural in such circumstances. Maria realized she needed to take charge of the situation, using her medical training's emphasis on calm decision-making under pressure to guide both the civilians and, indirectly, the military personnel around them. She keyed her radio with a steady voice that cut through the chaos of overlapping transmissions. All units, this is Overwatch. I have visual contact with all 3 civilians, moving to extraction point north. Request all units maintain position until civilians are clear. Her professional tone and clear communication had an immediate calming effect on the radio traffic. Torres heard Maria's transmission and felt a grudging respect for her composure under pressure. Many soldiers, including some with more combat experience than she had, might have panicked or become confused in such circumstances. Instead, she was thinking clearly and taking responsibility for the civilian safety that had become the most critical aspect of the exercise. The smoke continued to thicken as Maria guided the civilians through the maze of concrete barriers and abandoned equipment that filled the training area. She could hear the SEALs moving to reposition themselves, their discipline evident in the minimal noise they made despite the challenging conditions. Professional soldiers adapt to changing circumstances, but this exercise was testing their ability to balance mission completion with civilian protection in ways that no amount of classroom training could fully prepare them for As they approached. What she hoped was the extraction point. Maria realized that the most dangerous part of the exercise was yet to come. Getting the civilians out of the immediate area was only the first challenge. The real test would be whether everyone involved could maintain their professionalism and judgment as the exercise controllers continued to escalate the pressure, pushing both the SEALs and support personnel beyond their normal comfort zones into situations that would reveal their true character under fire. The smoke was beginning to clear when Maria heard something that made her blood run cold. Behind them, from the direction of the target building, came the sound of simulated automatic weapons fire, much louder and more intense than anything they had heard before. The exercise controllers had apparently decided to escalate the scenario while civilians were still in the area, creating exactly the kind of pressure cooker situation that Special Operations Forces might face in real combat. Through her headset, she could hear Torres coordinating his team's response to the simulated attack. Alpha Team, we have multiple contacts in the target building. Bravo, can you provide suppressive fire while we reposition? The professional calm in his voice impressed her, even as she realized the SEALs were being forced to conduct their mission while knowing that civilians were still nearby. The woman Maria was trying to evacuate suddenly stopped walking and pointed back toward the building, shouting something in Arabic that sounded like desperate pleading. The role-player's performance was so convincing that Maria found herself responding emotionally, even knowing this was an exercise. Through the clearing smoke, they could all see figures moving around the target building, and the sounds of simulated combat were intensifying. Lieutenant Commander Morrison was facing a command decision that would be studied in military academies for years to come. The exercise had evolved beyond anyone's planning, but shutting it down now might waste a unique training opportunity. Real combat operations frequently involved exactly this type of chaos, where mission objectives had to be balanced against civilian safety and split-second decisions that could have lasting consequences. Maria made a choice that surprised everyone, including herself. Instead of continuing toward the extraction point, she began moving back toward the combat zone. Control, this is Overwatch. The female civilian is indicating someone may still be in the target building. Requesting permission to investigate. The radio silence that followed her transmission spoke volumes about how unprecedented the situation had become. Torres heard Maria's transmission and felt a mixture of admiration and concern. Moving toward door, danger to check on civilian welfare was exactly what Special Operations Forces did in real combat. But Maria wasn't Special Operations. She was a medic whose job was to treat casualties, not create them by moving into harm's way. Yet her instinct to protect civilians was something every SEAL could respect. The simulated battle sounds stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow more unsettling than the previous chaos. Maria continued moving toward the building, the civilian woman following despite obvious fear. The child had stopped crying but clung to Maria with the trust that children naturally place in adults who show confidence during crisis. Through the dissipating smoke, Maria could see SEAL team members positioned at various points around the target building. Their discipline was evident in how they maintained security while accommodating her unauthorized movement through their operational area. These were warriors trained to respond to threats with overwhelming force, yet they were showing remarkable restraint as they adapted to an evolving situation that no training manual had prepared them for. As Maria approached the building entrance, she heard a new sound that changed everything. From inside came what sounded like a child's voice, crying and calling out in Arabic. The exercise controllers had apparently placed another role player inside the building, creating a scenario where completing the military mission might require entering a structure that contained both enemy targets and innocent civilians. Torres faced an impossible decision. His team's mission was to secure the building and neutralize all hostile contacts inside. But if there were civilians present, any aggressive action could result in simulated casualties that would be treated as real failures in the post-exercise evaluation. Military careers had been ended by poor performance in high-profile training exercises, especially those involving civilian casualty scenarios. Maria keyed her radio with steady professionalism. All units, I can hear what sounds like a child inside the target building, requesting permission to make contact and assess the situation. The response came directly from Morrison, his command authority clear despite the unprecedented nature of the request. Overwatch, you are authorized to make contact. All units. Will provide security but hold fire until threat assessment is complete. The woman beside Maria began speaking rapidly, pointing at the building and making gestures that clearly indicated she believed her child was inside. Whether this was part of the exercise script or genuine role-player improvisation, her distress seemed completely authentic. Maria realized she was about to enter a building that contained unknown threats, with her only backup being SEAL team members who were trained for combat rather than civilian rescue. As she approached the entrance, Maria could see Torres positioning his men to provide covering fire if needed. The respect she had earned from the special operations community in the past few minutes was evident in how they treated her movement as a legitimate tactical evolution, rather than an unauthorized deviation from exercise protocols. The building entrance loomed before her, dark and filled with unknown dangers. Inside, a child's voice continued to call out, a sound that pulled at every protective instinct she possessed. Behind her, some of the most elite warriors in the world had shifted their mission focus to supporting her civilian rescue attempt, showing a flexibility and humanity that contradicted every stereotype about special operations forces being focused solely on combat effectiveness. Maria stepped through the building entrance with her weapon lowered but ready, every sense alert for signs of danger. The interior was darker than she had expected, with shafts of sunlight cutting through the smoky air and creating a maze of shadows where threats could be hiding. The child's crying echoed from somewhere deeper in the building, but the acoustics made it impossible to pinpoint the exact location. Torres had positioned himself at the entrance, providing overwatch while maintaining communication with his team. Through his scope, he could see Maria moving methodically through the ground floor, her medical training evident in how she checked corners and doorways for both threats and casualties. She was operating in hostile territory without the extensive close-quarters combat training that SEALs received. Yet her movements showed remarkable tactical awareness. The crying stopped suddenly, replaced by a silence that made everyone more alert. Maria froze in position, listening for any sound that might indicate whether the child was in immediate danger or had simply been frightened into quiet by the sounds of people entering the building. Through her headset, she could hear Torres coordinating his team's positions to provide backup if the situation deteriorated. Lieutenant Commander Morrison watched the tactical display with growing concern. The exercise had evolved into something that resembled a real hostage rescue operation, but without the extensive planning and specialized equipment that such missions normally required. Maria was essentially conducting a solo rescue operation in a building that might contain armed opposition, protected only by perimeter security from SEAL team members who couldn't risk friendly fire by advancing too aggressively. As Maria moved deeper into the building, she heard voices speaking in low, urgent tones from an upper floor. The exercise controllers had apparently positioned role players throughout the structure, creating a complex scenario where distinguishing between civilians and combatants would require careful observation and restraint. Any mistaken identification could result in simulated casualties that would be evaluated as real failures in mission performance. The woman who had been following Maria remained at the building entrance, held back by Torres, who recognized that having untrained civilians inside a potentially hostile structure would create unacceptable risks. Through gestures and limited shared vocabulary, he tried to communicate that they were working to locate and secure anyone inside, but her obvious distress at being separated from what she believed was her child created additional emotional pressure on everyone involved. Maria found a stairway leading to the upper floors and began climbing, Her medical kit adjusted to prevent noise that might mask important audio cues. The voices she had heard earlier seemed to be coming from directly above, but she couldn't determine whether they represented threats or additional civilians in need of rescue. Each step took her further from the backup provided by the SEAL team, increasing her isolation and vulnerability. On the second floor, Maria discovered a partially open door behind which she could hear what sounded like adult voices speaking Arabic in urgent, hushed tones. The child's crying had resumed, now clearly coming from the same room. Through the crack in the door she could see movement, but couldn't identify whether the occupants were armed or posed any threat to the child she was trying to rescue. Torres had moved into the building and was positioned at the base of the stairway, close enough to provide support but far enough away to avoid compromising Maria's operation. His team members had taken positions that would allow them to respond quickly if the situation turned violent, but their rules of engagement in a training exercise with civilian role players remained unclear and potentially conflicting. Maria made the decision to announce her presence rather than attempting tactical surprise. "Medical personnel," she called out in English, then repeated the phrase in the limited Arabic she knew. "I'm here to help with the injured." The voices inside the room stopped immediately, replaced by silence that stretched for several tense seconds before someone responded in accented English. "Please, we have child hurt. Need doctor." The voice sounded genuinely distressed, and Maria could hear what might be a child whimpering in the background. Whether this was sophisticated role-playing or a genuine accident during the exercise, her medical training took over. She pushed the door open slowly, her hands visible and empty of weapons, and stepped into a room that would test every skill she had learned in 8 years of military service. Inside, she found what appeared to be a family group, huddled around a small girl who was lying on the floor. The role-players had created a scenario that perfectly mimicked the kind of civilian casualty situation that medical personnel faced in real combat zones. The child appeared to be unconscious, and there were what looked like injury simulation markers that indicated serious trauma requiring immediate medical intervention. As Maria knelt beside the injured child, she heard Torres on the radio coordinating with the command post. "Control, Overwatch has made contact with civilian casualties inside the target building. Request guidance on medical evacuation procedures." The response revealed just how far the exercise had evolved beyond its original parameters. "All units. Exercise is now focused on civilian casualty evacuation. Military objectives are secondary until all civilians are secured." The announcement that their mission had officially changed from combat operations to humanitarian rescue lifted a weight from everyone involved. Maria began treating the simulated injuries with the same professional attention she would give to real casualties, while the SEAL team members repositioned themselves to support medical evacuation rather than combat assault. What had begun as a test of military effectiveness had become a demonstration of how elite warriors could adapt their skills to protect and serve civilian populations under the most challenging circumstances. The medical evacuation proceeded with the same precision and coordination that had characterized the original combat mission, but with a completely different focus. Maria worked to stabilize the simulated injuries while Torres organized his team to clear evacuation routes and establish security for medical personnel. The role players maintained their characters throughout, creating an emotionally charged environment that tested everyone's ability to perform under psychological pressure. As Maria prepared the child for evacuation, she realized that the exercise had revealed something important about the nature of courage and leadership that went beyond military rank or specialized training. The SEAL team members, despite being among the most elite warriors in the world, had deferred to her medical expertise and adapted their tactics to support her humanitarian mission. Their willingness to shift from combat operations to civilian protection showed a flexibility and humanity that contradicted stereotypes about special operations forces. The evacuation required careful coordination between multiple teams, with Maria directing medical procedures while Torres managed security and logistics. Lieutenant Commander Morrison had repositioned additional assets to support the operation, treating it with the same seriousness and resource commitment that would be applied to a real civilian casualty situation. The exercise controllers documented every decision and action, recognizing that they were witnessing something that would become a case study in adaptive leadership and inter-unit cooperation. As they carried the simulated casualty toward the evacuation point, the woman who had been waiting outside ran forward with obvious relief at seeing all the children safe. Her performance had been so convincing that even experienced military personnel found themselves emotionally invested in reuniting the family, demonstrating how realistic training scenarios could create genuine psychological impact that enhanced learning and retention. The exercise concluded with a detailed debriefing that lasted longer than the actual operation. Military analysts reviewed video recordings from multiple angles, examining decision-making processes and communication patterns that had emerged during the unscripted evolution from combat mission to humanitarian operation. Maria's actions became the subject of particular interest, not because she had violated protocol, but because her instinctive response to civilian danger had catalyzed a series of adaptations that revealed important truths about military effectiveness. In complex environments, Staff Sergeant Torres, who had initially been skeptical about having non-SEAL personnel in the exercise, was among the first to acknowledge that Maria's performance had elevated the training value for everyone involved. "She did what we're all trained to do," he said during the debriefing. "Adapt to changing circumstances and protect innocent lives regardless of personal risk. The fact that she's not special operations doesn't matter when she's demonstrating the values that special operations are supposed to represent." The story of the exercise spread throughout the special operations community, not as an example of training gone wrong, but as a demonstration of how military personnel could adapt their skills to serve humanitarian goals without compromising their effectiveness. Maria received official recognition for her performance, but more importantly, she had earned the respect of warriors who rarely acknowledged outsiders as equals in matters of courage and tactical judgment. Months later, when Maria was deployed to an actual combat zone, her reputation had preceded her. Special operations teams specifically requested her unit's support, knowing that she had proven herself capable of making sound decisions under pressure while maintaining focus on civilian protection. The exercise had become legend, passed down through informal networks as a story about the day. Even the SEALs dropped their aim until she walked into the kill zone. The lasting impact of that training exercise extended far beyond individual recognition or career advancement. It had demonstrated that true military excellence required more than tactical skill or physical courage. The most important battles were sometimes won not through superior firepower, but through the wisdom to recognize when protection of innocent life took precedence over mission objectives, and the character to act on that recognition regardless of personal risk. Years later, as Maria continued her military career and eventually transitioned to civilian medical practice, she would reflect on that day as a turning point in her understanding of leadership and service. The exercise had shown her that courage wasn't about being the strongest or most highly trained person in the room. Sometimes it was about being the person willing to step forward when everyone else hesitated, to make difficult decisions based on humanitarian values rather than tactical considerations, and to take responsibility for outcomes that affected people who couldn't protect themselves. The SEALs who worked with her that day had learned the same lesson, and their willingness to adapt their mission to support her civilian rescue efforts had demonstrated that true warriors understand the difference between fighting for victory and fighting for what's right.